All right, how's it going, everybody? Uh, we are getting towards the end of the competitive season for Opus 23. There's still about a month left. Obviously, locals or any other of those tournaments could be. I know that some webcam tournaments are run. The Japanese Standard Championship, um, or I guess Masters Championship, because the Standard Championship technically happened last set for them. The JP organized play stuff is confusingly named, but we're getting kind of deep enough into Opus 23 that I wanted to go back and just reflect on the set as a nebulous whole and talk about the cards that I think have surpassed expectations, done less than I expected, um, so on and so forth. If something's interesting, I'm just going to talk about it. Uh, Starting off, like the Garland Knights are still around, and it's been interesting because I've seen this Garland even be split where they run like two of the previous Garland and one of this one. I'm a little surprised. I feel like that both are correct. So I almost wonder if it's better to just pick one and stick with it. I'll trust that Hunter Nance knows what he's doing when he does stuff like that. But it's definitely an interesting decision. Caius is a decent card, but he's not fixing any of the issues that are gating a Bahamut heavy deck from showing up. It's nice that you have this ability to get a Bahamut, and Bahamuts are very powerful, and you get to cast them for literally free. But both 13 and Mono Fire, which are like the biggest homes for a card like this, just haven't had really. Mist Dragon is so prevalent that Mono Fire and Montleonis have really struggled to get off the ground as the meta has developed in Opus 22 and Opus 23. And Caius doesn't really change the math on it. It's a very strong card. I think it's a card that could age very well. But as of right now, you're almost just happy playing like a backup Saz or something and getting the 5 CP Bahamut and casting it anyway. If you really need to just get that kill spell. Going through. I've seen this Kefka experimented a little bit with, but it's not like until we get a really reliable self damage deck. This card really doesn't have a chance. If we do get a deck that is this game's equivalent of like a Death Shadow, where you just keep doing stuff that damages yourself, and you can reliably get to damage 5 on turn 4 or turn 5. This Kefka could actually be really strong, but that's a to be seen thing. Soul Cage, I'm a little surprised that he hasn't seen much play. I think this card is still very strong and has the potential to show up in the future. The biggest thing, honestly, has just been that monsters have been so focused on water and earth in particular that it's hard to make room for a card like this. Even if the water earth monsters deck doesn't mind playing a lot of fire cards, the more you add, the harder it gets, and the character balance of the deck is already very difficult. So even though I think in a vacuum this card is very strong, it falls a little short in being strong, like a glue card that needs to be in your deck to see play. I still hate give us new backups, please. I'm begging you at this point. Stop reprinting these idiots, or just say they're perpetually legal. And this is the third time they've been reprinted, fourth time. We can do better. Give me an evoker that makes a crystal, right? I don't know if they're worried about card art or if there's a critical mass of these things that it's too difficult. If they're worried about a critical mass of them, if you go in 2 colors, you can already play 6 standard unit backups that make crystals on entry, and a Spiritus or Materia. It's not that hard to have every backup you play in your deck generate a crystal. It, just really frustrating design. This Sedain, again, keep an eye on him, keep your foils close. This card will eventually be good, or played in something if Category 9 ever becomes a thing. Any card like this is just eventually going to be fine to good. Zorn and Thorn is actually better than I thought. I've seen some really fun combos with this, like with the Hasty Squall. You could go like Zorn and Thorn, Squall, modulate your hand down to a hand size, and then the Squall guarantees gets to do the double cleave, which is really powerful. And then usually what I've seen done is you just crash it in to cash it out for a Soul Cage or something from deck. This card, I really didn't know what it would look like to play in practice because I thought like forcing them to block when he attacks seemed awkward to me. But it turns out you just find cashing it out for a monster most of the time anyway if you're playing this card. So I think this came out better than I expected, even if it hasn't seen a ton of competitive play. These soldiers candidates are actually pretty interesting. I think the Earth one actually has potential if we ever get like a true I'm going to play 8 standard unit forwards in my deck type of deck with like the Warrior of Light. Terra is everything I thought she would be and more. This card is broken. Like genuinely off the wall, completely broken. I did not think this card would see the amount of play that she saw because I thought people would be more hesitant to adopt her, but it turns out that she's just really good. And also decks need 30 EX bursts to compete with Chaos, and she has a really good one in general. She also has a little bit of the Porum effect where it's like it's very difficult to block her. Like your opponent doesn't want to get rid of this card, but there's all situations where like you can just have it sit and they have to do it. Really strong card. This Moro's seen a little smattering of play here and there, which is nice. Nilapa has seen less play than I would have expected. But I think it really is just boils down to fire is in a weird spot. If you're not exactly named Tyvis, like even the fire backups seem like to me at this point the weakest backups in the game. Like I think of like Mono Ice. Mono Ice has this like critical density of good ice backups, and even an engine now with Emina if you want to run one. I'm not even sure you have to. And fire to me feels like the element that like doesn't get enough out of its backups to play a mono fire deck, which and then like 6 hasn't been present, so Nalapa hasn't had a chance in like a 6 deck. And any deck that is playing fire plus something is probably splashing 2 more colors for Warrior of Light, and at that point, usually it's worth just going for the extra colors, which squeezes out a card like this, like a tech slot. And it doesn't have a burst, so like the Water Fire deck that's playing all the EXs, like the Water Fire Warriors deck doesn't really have room for this. I think it could, in theory, if this format was to be retroactively visited, I think there's a chance that the Water Fire Warrior deck would adopt Nalapa to stop losing to stuff like Amaterasu and things like that. But I also do understand, like, with the way the format has shaken out, why this has not seen the amount of play that we thought it might. Similarly, I'm surprised to have not seen Knights players adopt Parai. I think this card is really good. Just like, they don't care about damage because if Knights goes to 6 damage, they might as well be on 7 anyway. And the ability to get just like an extra free body that like does something on entry is really good. Like, genuinely really strong card. And honestly, in this game, taking damage is like an actual benefit. Like, even in a deck like Knights, let's say that you play this and you hit a Garland. Now all of a sudden this card is literally less than free. Um, like it draws you 2 cards and costs you 2 from hand. There just aren't cards in the game that do that most of the time off of no backups. And like, granted, that's the ceiling, but like you don't get a chance like that unless you take damage anyway, and you don't. Since you take so little damage in the deck, it's actually probably just worth messing with. The monk and the red mage, the cycle of backups has been generally only okay, but these two have been standouts. Turns out that the standard unit 3 CP your opponent discards is really nice in Giga Wall exactly. It's about the best rate you can get for an effect like that on something that develops a permanent thing on the field. Might actually have seen more experimentation if there was like a mono ice discard deck, or even like there's an argument to consider it for like my ice lightning deck as well, to try to keep my opponent's hand size low as I develop. So I think this is a very interesting card. And then Monk, obviously, for Magissa is really good. This Weiss is better than I gave it credit for. Not even for the crystal, but it's a decent enough card name Weiss you can play off of a Narrow in mono ice. So you can run one extra named Weiss to search if you don't want to search Weiss too early in the game. And like he becomes a 9k Brave that makes your opponent discard on entry for 3 CP, which is like, it's serviceable. It's not amazing. Anima is completely disgusting. I can't believe this card is printed. It's a little awkward. There are games where it kind of sits in your hand and your opponent's on like that one last card you can't get out of their hand. But I think this is the sleeper hit of the set. This is the card that I think is going to stand the test of time and eventually is going to end up being not so fondly remembered, honestly, as like one of the best cards in the game. I genuinely think this card is completely broken. The Shiva actually is not bad. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. It really does boil down to like Ice's summons are so bad that an effect like this actually is relatively okay. I would keep an eye on Shulk. I think that like crystals are in a weird place, but the cards that are these 2 CP forwards that generate a crystal on entry and have the potential to generate more crystals as the game goes on, like I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to play 3 of this with 3 Narrow and 3 Weiss in an ice deck, and maybe you generate 2 crystals on accident, right? And you can cash those crystals out for more than Shulk ends up being worth. I just think that this like line of text of like this 2 CP forward generates crystals and then can protect itself in some way is not ever going to be a card that I will discount. Cecil, I see like a little bit of play. It showed up in like the North American game. I really just like, if you could play this card, you can play Lastwell, which is a Opus 16 rare, and there's just not a world I will ever make that trade. Um, I had a bunch of Ice and Lightning cards I was considering for my deck, and the Cecil just wasn't even on the radar after a while. Like, there were so many cards that felt stronger than this, than what this gave me access to, that I like. If I wanted to dull freeze 2 characters, like Vincent is close enough to dull freeze 2 characters that I would just play it over it. Xenos is a card that is actually weaker than I expected. He's seen some experimentation in like there are mono ice control decks trying to make use of Kate Sith and getting relatively close to succeeding, I think. And some of those decks are on Xenos. But I didn't realize this. It doesn't remove cards. It only removes characters in the breakstone from the game. So it's a lot awkward. Like, you can't hit some of the cards you really feel like you want to. Like, removing summons a lot of times is more valuable than removing characters or forwards. And that ends up just kind of making the card feel worse than it needed to be. I don't think it's bad, but I can count on one hand the number of times I've gotten a discard off my opponent with Xenos after I played him the first time. Sarah, again, just kind of falls under another copy of Red Mage with like an extra utility. If you like opponent goes to no cards in hand, like you probably play the Sarah over Red Mage in a lot of those like Gigawall lists, but you probably don't mind playing 4 copies of Sarah. And if you want to play more than 1 copy of Sarah, you might as well play copies of Red Mage instead. Like there's not enough of a difference between them to not play the other one. But for a common, that's more than you could hope for. Drautos is a weird one. I really just think we're past the point in this game where people are happy to play French vanillas like this, even ones with large bodies, which is weird because again, body size. People say like, "Oh, combat doesn't matter. Combat doesn't matter," but I really think like if you look at the burst people are playing right now in the mono fire deck, Ifrit from Opus 12 is coming out because it's the only fire burst that can hit Chaos and the disciplinary committee members. So like body size clearly is impacting the format. And this is a 2 CP AK. Like he's very, very large and can be difficult to remove. But I think like he doesn't necessarily do anything. And that ends up just being enough to put people off of being excited to play the card. I think this is a card that might be seeing less play than its power level would indicate because it doesn't feel powerful. And I think for that reason, it's going to just stay never played. Probably correctly, honestly. I really think that we're at a point in this game where you don't. There's not a turn off to play a card like this. We'll get to another example of that later, I think. This Flan, I am not a believer in the Flan deck, like the Flan Ice Earth Kate Sith thing. Like I think the Flans are just a really high deck building cost for something that is like only okay. Like I get the idea is like the old Flan is such a good card and just like searching anything with it is fine and like it can color fix you, but like there's so many other like powerful things you can put in your deck, and like dead cards that are just happen to be named Flan is not where I personally want to be. Um, Adele is really cool. I wish she was like a 2 CP 5K. Maybe that would be broken, but uh, if they print like Azura 2 in the future that like gets to recur a 3 cost, or like they print a backup that gets a forward, like a win character back to the break zone, Adele could be a lot better. Or if Bismarck becomes better, because Bismarck is a card that really fixes, and like you almost want to get around her downside with something like a Bismarck or a No-No. And the problem is that like No-No is a card that's at its best when you're already winning, and Bismarck is a card that just is really slow for the current format. This Vaan has seen a lot of like hype and experimentation and play as like a wind board wipe. I'm going to be level with y'all. I think this card sucks. Like the idea is that like if you play it and then generate a crystal tangentially or it gets to attack, you can spend the crystals and special to do an 8k cleave to your opponent's forwards. And I see the logic there. But I don't want to pay 4 for gain a crystal. And I think this is a really inefficient use of crystals. I think that like one crystal doing a 2k cleave is not enough for what a crystal represents value wise. And then if you have to also tack a special on top, you're holding these really bad dog water cards in your hand to try to enable a special as a board wipe. Like the goddess exists, y'all. Like Fat Chocobo exists. You don't have to do this. Like here's another example. Like Fat Chocobo costs 8, but there's no timing restrictions on Fat Chocobo. And this costs 8. The Life of Crime 2 crystals cost 8 if you have, you know, because Vaan himself costs 2. And yes, you kind of generate this like value engine with him, but like the Fat Chocobo summon exists. There's no reason to be playing a card like this outside of limited, where I will admit very strong and limited. Silver Dragon, by the way, I've had this back attacked in on me off of an Animus to protect a monster, which was crazy. This card is a lot better than I thought it would be. I haven't experimented enough with mono in this set to know if Dr. Mog is any good, but I just kind of like this card. I think that it has a lot of potential if slower games start to happen and mono in can really survive. 13 with wind. So I've heard some conflicting stuff, but there's honestly at the end of the day there are just no results for the 13 like hope null like package, and part of me wonders like is that just like people are not excited to play 13? Is it well these other decks are so powerful and so explosive, or is it like is this a deck that's being choked out by some of the aggro in the format? Like, I don't really know what Hope is supposed to do to stop the Chaos combo decks because the game is over before you ever get to do like his ability twice. Um, I see why people are excited for the potential long term on Hope, but I also kind of just wonder if this is a card that like it reminds me too much of Pain without even having the burst, like the 3 CP Pain to go search a Yuna or a Riku. And that card just like continuously gets shaved out of decks. And granted, the targets for it are seemingly limitless. Like there's so many good Category 13 characters, but there's a lot of good Rikus and Yunas, right? And that's almost where I'm wondering with this card. Or like if I'm playing Scions, one of the first ones I end up cutting sometimes becomes Grahatia because it's just so much more expensive and you lose so much more when Graha gets modded versus when Alize gets modded or when Ishtola gets hit with an Amat, right? And I feel like Hope falls prey to that in the same way. Um, the ninjas haven't done too much. Yuffie's gotten a little bit of hype as the best other Yuffie to play as a Yuffie special. She's starting to kind of see some play for that reason. Um, Not relevant to the card, but General Leo is very funny to me because I think I have pulled 5 of this idiot in foil. So I'm hoping he's good someday. Do I think he will be? He's fine. Like, he's not a bad card. He's just not a card that I think is ever going to be a reason to build a deck. Ignis. This card's really good. I love this card and what it changes for retainers. I think retainers are still a very slept on deck and engine, and they do a lot of really cool and interesting and powerful things. And I think having a backup with a burst is a very good improvement to the deck. Um, Warrior, it's Vincent. We'll talk. I should talk about all the legends at least a little bit. I just don't see a reason to play this guy for the most part. We might be waiting until Opus 25 with the new wave of FF7 things. But Earth and FF7 isn't like. I mean, you have like Avalanche. But again, like, Avalanche wasn't being gate kept out of the meta by missing a card like this. Right? So. I don't think it's necessarily weak, but like we talk about like you compare this to a card like Garuda 3, and Garuda 3 was lambasted for Warp 5. This is probably a weaker effect than Garuda 3, and a longer warp if you can't speed it up, which is kind of damning. I think this Warrior of Light is really cool. There's enough interesting standard unit forwards where like I think this guy has a chance to be good eventually. My some of my favorites. There's the White Mage from Opus 20 or 21. That's just like it's Alize for a standard unit forward of cost 3, so you can kind of like play Warrior of Light, dump that, dump the other one, revive the White Mage, which then revives the other one, and like you're off to the races. I think being able to revive backups is really cool. It can cheat in off-color backups. Even something like dumping a Lufenian on turn 1, then ditching 2 to play the Lufenian could be really cool. It's mostly held back by a combination of its name and the current speed of the meta. It's just kind of the way the game is at the moment. I do love like the way its recurring value and its ability to continuously replay some of these threats though. Emmet Selk is awesome. I know that Mono Earth is by consensus the best deck in the game right now. I think that like some players like Alex Hancock's are like it's bad mono wind. I don't agree at all. I think it's like better mono wind. I remember when I read this card at first, I thought that without the EX burst, playing Emmet Selk as a fair card would never happen. I'm glad I'm wrong. I think that like the way that he enables the Mono Earth deck to grind and grind and grind is really cool. Actually, I really like this card. Shantoto is broken. This card, I know it doesn't seem like a lot. The name clash sucks, I'm sure, but like if you watch some of the streams that I've done where I play Earth, Wind, Storm, it's pivoted to this card and playing Matoya in the board wipe slot, and I don't miss the other Shantoto for it. It's that good. Like seriously, I know it feels really wrong, but if you're in a deck that getting back 2 summons can win you the game, consider messing with the Shantoto. Like Earth, Water, Chaos, Arc. I know, like I do like the Shantoto is so good. It's so strong. Trust me, give it a chance. Soldier Candidate. I think this card is really good if you have the standard units to power it up. I just don't know that we have the standard units to do that consistently. How do I talk about Hithlodaeus? Uh, why? Like, so to be fair, I don't think Hithlodaeus has any recent results. It didn't top in A, didn't top in Oceania, and I don't think it topped in Europe. I'm actually gonna go double check that because I don't want to be wrong on that. That looks like Mono Earth. That's definitely not it. That's definitely Mono Earth. That's like a 4-color Refia. Yeah. Yeah, so like it doesn't have any tops. But the play pattern against this deck is so miserable, and it really feels like it's just like, are you playing a deck that can force me to discard? No, cool. You die on turn 3. Like fair decks can't beat this deck. Um, and the tools that fair decks have to interact with it don't deal with Cleone, and I don't think like Cleone is an annoying card, but it's double sided, and there are like downsides to playing Cleone in most decks. Like if you're trying to play Cleone to protect your unfair shit, you're playing it at a pretty large cost to yourself most of the time. This deck is doing it in engine and using it to enable a deck that draws its entire deck on turn 3 and kills you. I don't think that is like I think that is as bad as dying on turn 2 to Chaos still. Chaos, at least the game ends quickly and you could shuffle up and play a second game at locals. You play against this deck and it's like the counterplay doesn't feel like it's there a lot of the time for what it does. Why is it not topping? I think it's a little bricky. It's a little hard to pilot. It auto loses to the second most played deck in the format in Chaos. Like it can't beat that deck. It's not able to play any interaction whatsoever. Like it only can do the combo because you can't. If you play non-engine, you start to mess with the Hithlodaeus hit rate. I just don't see a world this card is ever healthy or good beyond being a party trick deck that like keeps locals from playing the game. And I know that like I'm not trying to disparage anybody that plays the Hithlo combo deck at locals and has fun with it, because I think that people should be allowed to play what they want to. But I think that if, as a steward of a game, it is your responsibility to remove problematic designs like this from it. And I would almost over even Chaos, I would ban Hithlodaeus. that's how much I dislike the play pattern of this deck. It is funny that like Hiodas does well into the best deck of the format, though. It actually is a really good Mono Earth matchup. Moving along. Prompto, this is a nice utility backup. You'll see play potentially in decks going forward. Um, I know I kind of laughed at the Vaan, but again, I think like 2 CP, enter the field, gain a crystal is about the right cost for a forward that does that. Having any upside on top of it's kind of nice. I could see Lael eventually seeing some little bit of play. Small note on Regis. I know that he's not seeing play now, but this is a card to keep an eye on. It just turns out I can't think of many cards in FFTCG that have a revival effect like this that haven't seen play at some point. It literally is just like Regis and White Mage are it. So if they keep printing cards in the game, at some point they will print a 5-cost category 5 forward. And in that situation, you might be happy you have some number of copies of this card. Azel and the Crystal Sviets. I still think this package is effectively the Opus 15 Rebels of the set. People aren't experimenting with it because I think it's even less exciting than that package was. But I don't know. I wonder like if something is there. Like Azel isn't bad. Um, Shelk isn't bad. Weiss isn't bad. Like if there is like an Ice Lightning Sviets deck, maybe I'll play it at local sometime and just see like maybe there's something there. Estinian, so much better than I thought this card was. Holy cow. This card's really nuts. It feels like the card that Scions was actually missing. Being able to loop it, like the biggest thing is just making sure you can do an Ishtola special every single turn. And the fact that he can loop himself, he ends up even just being able to like be a good turn one play sometimes against value decks because he's going to be free and do. There's almost like against control decks, you want to be doing your damage as effectively CP wise as possible because you know that once you get past a certain amount of CP, they're going to win. Obsidian is the character that can do 2 or 3 damage for almost no CP cost. This Puppet Master is a great bomb unlimited, a way of like closing games out that you can't win otherwise. I saw somebody resolve the 5 or more backups trigger on this guy one time and like laugh my ass off. The classier cadets in this set, I still think there's a chance for King. I think pretty definitively Queen and Jack probably are not worth it. I think Jack maybe also like um a Stitcher supplier uh, is just maybe good enough for Final Fantasy. Like if you can mill a um, disciplinary committee member, you get 2 forwards in the bargain for 2 CP. He's above curve. Like I think that this guy might be underplayed for his power level, especially if you pair it with like a Category 8 deck. Like I think it's like one of the most efficient ways of milling yourself in the game next to like an Axis. But this is one that actually can continue to do damage, unlike the Axis. I think though that like King makes good use of just dead cards in your break zone to become a really cheap forward. Like think of how much like play Nyx has seen in the LB deck in aggro decks, and realize that King kind of does that, but better, with the caveat of he does cost 2 CP more because you have to have him in hand. But I don't really see that as a real cost in a lot of decks, right? Like should Chaos maybe have experiment with this guy a bit? Like you remove a couple of dead other cards in the break zone from the game, and then like I unironically could see this card being slept on, and I think again the ace from Opus 21 is so strong that maybe these cards are better than they read on the surface just to enable that ace. Thancred is good. He definitely also gets what I call the Porum syndrome, which is like you don't want to kill him, but you don't have a lot of choice. I've seen like water players bounce this guy, and you feel really bad when you bounce him, so you have to kill him. But when you kill him, he plays a target from the break zone. It ends up being this like huge, obnoxious problem for decks to deal with sometimes. I think the real hero was Astinian, but I think Thancred is a notable upgrade for the Scions deck. I do think that like it's annoying you have to play a card like Cryo, because I don't think Cryo would see play if Thancred didn't need Scion backups, and there just aren't Scion backups in Lightning, as it turns out. Moving through, I think Sarah is underplayed, but again, I think people just have gotten in their heads that the 13 deck is not worth experimenting with. I don't think that deck is as bad as people think it is, but I'm also not a pilot of that deck that I would consider at a caliber which to evaluate its power level properly. And if someone like Steve Sauce has struggled this much this competitive season with to make 13 work, I maybe will accept that I am wrong, that Fire Lightning 13 is well and truly not worth playing. I think this Mach 13-2 backup is really good, though. Kind of funny, this Ashtoa has seen quite a bit of play. I've seen like people like splash a bunch of different Ashtoas. This one could just maybe end the game if you need it. I can't understand why they printed up Kalu. It like seems innocuous. It seems like a card that like shouldn't be a problematic design, but it really just kind of is. Like I can't think of a better way of saying it. So I like even seeing this at like one copy a deck in monster decks is like the way it pairs with cards like Atomos and Evray and Hippocampos. It's a really scary card. Alfino and Urianger are good. Urianger's seen a lot more play than I expected. I still maintain there's a bit of awkwardness to the Water Lightning Scion deck in that like that deck ends up with like 3 water backups and like 1 to 2 lightning backups. And like you look at the forward lineup, it's like lightning forward, lightning forward, lightning forward, lightning forward. But they seem to be making it work just fine. You just kind of need Scion names, and you kind of don't mind having backups in general. And none of the Orion Jays or the Alfinos are really competing with that. Alfino giving you kind of an in-engine backup engine is really nice. Urianger being a burst in this current meta is really good, and you're playing enough Scions to enable him anyway. I do think he's going to be he's still a really painful whiff when he whiffs, but I do see why he's seeing play. Exton Mill, I think, is criminally underplayed. I think that like the Ryan Shen idea of, well, some decks just can't out a 9k untargetable is actually correct. And he's not only that, he's Schrodinger's 9k sometimes. Like you like can put him in a situation where like, I'm not going to spend the crystal until I have to. I think that like some of the cards he pulls from the deck are really powerful. This card is just really good, as it turns out. I'm gonna hold off on Dancer. I wish this card had like slightly relevant text. It just doesn't. But I'll talk more about Dancers when I get to Portia. Gizmaluke. It's funny that like any other monster deck would love this card, like Element, and Water is like, that's cool. We can draw anyway with our gazillion 2CP monsters that draw a card on entry. We don't need to play a card like this. I saw a little bit of experimentation with Quina. It's really cute with like Witch of the Fens and um, Moth Slasher exactly, but I still think this card is like it's you just don't have room for it in most monster decks. Wish of the Fens is interesting because it clearly is really strong, and I have heard people say that like this is the reason that Refia doesn't do well in the current meta. I am starting to have more complicated feelings on this card. It's clearly good, but it's not the slam dunk 3 of in every single monster deck that I thought it was when I first read the card. I think she introduces a couple of vulnerabilities to monster decks that they don't otherwise have. First of all, she is the biggest Amaterasu bait of all time. If you go for Witch of the Fens in a water deck and I have Amaterasu, I will Amaterasu you and say, how many monsters are you willing to cash out right here, right now? We are both paying 3 CP. How many monsters are you also sacrificing with it? And I think in those situations, the card feels really bad if she doesn't get the draw on entry. And I've seen it where, like, Refia, for instance, does not have mechanisms to remove monsters, and my opponent playing a witch, sure, like, yeah, they really need to kill the Refia and the Ferris, and, well, let's get that Warrior of Light out of here as well. You just killed all your monsters. You killed 3 cards that I could never have dealt with in that time frame. I think it's a much harder card to play than I think we thought it would be at the start. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. Tataru, I underestimated her. I saw this card, saw the one line of text on a hero backup, and said, I don't think this is good enough. Turns out it's easy enough to enable her off of mostly backups, and thanks to Alize, you could have like Louisoix, Alfino, Alize, and like an Urian J, and you have enough, right? So this card's really good. I will straight up say I did not expect her to be as strong as she's ended up being. For Melda, this card has completely exceeded my expectations. I have seen what I can only describe as Fermelda control. Decks that play like Shantoto to turn Fermelda on, and then like Sirens, and then Fermelda. And Fermelda is just like this combination of a removal engine that like maybe deploys like a Warrior of Light or something, and you just kind of win the game by doing that. Like both modes in this card are so strong, and that like if your opponent can't interact with her, she just kind of wins. There maybe is an argument that like the Refia control list that I played at Oceanic Continentals could have considered a card like Fermelda over a card like an Une. I just didn't want to mess with my color ratios very much, or like in the Terra slot, for instance, right? Like this card is very, very good. Okay, Portia and Lilithette. I need to talk about these. I am going to say the cursed words. I am so sorry. Dancers are 1 card away. They're so close, guys. So at Oceania Nationals, 2 players from Hobby Japan, or 2 not players, but developers of the game, and one of them, Naide-san, is a professional Magic the Gathering player. Shocker, right? One of his 3 Gunslinger decks was Dancers. That was the strongest pile of bulk I have ever seen in this game. I think that deck is maybe actually more legit than people realize. With an exception. It is very weak in a summon heavy meta, but I saw that deck play against a Gigawall deck and just sit on a Mayakov and Lilithette. Not even the big Lilithette, the lightning one, just this Lilithette. Like just playing whatever it can when it can. And this special, Rousing Samba, is so strong. Like you don't even need the Lightning Lilith set anymore. Like you still play the Lightning Lilith set, and he was on Lena to raise Lilith set. Like he was on like Opus 1 3-cost Dancer backup, like just some unplayably bad dancers. And like that deck was so cool. Maybe I'll try to recreate it sometime. I genuinely think if they get a 2 CP Wind Dancer standard unit backup that is not unplayable, the deck is going to be good. The amount of times that like Portia just boop, boop, while being free, oh my goodness, just absurd value from these two cards. New twins, Porum and Palom. I really like the duo and how they play with the old ones. They haven't seen a ton of play currently, but I think there's potential for these still. Venat. I am probably the only person that I know of that actually play tested Venat outside of Limited. And she's not great. So I was playing Light Scions for a bit, and I didn't have 3 copies of the EX Citra for a while. And I needed something to play in the meantime, and this sort of fits in engine with Scions. I didn't have another use for the crystals other than Venat, but I figured, well, if I play Venat and then she dies, I get to, remove something from the game, and if she doesn't die, I search for the Medine, and I use the Medine and I kill something, right? That seemed good enough, right? I also can make her like a 9k first striker. That seems really cool. Like for defensive purposes with Ishtola, and it ended up being where most of the time when I had her, I just discarded her with to an effect that let me discard to get something back. I only ran her at I think I ran her at 1 to 2 copies. Yeah, maybe in the future, like if crystal stuff becomes more of a thing, I think the 2 to search anything in your deck is not bad at all. But I think this being if this was a wind card, I would play it. Like unironically, if this was wind, I think I would consider this for some decks. But being light really is the big issue here. I've never seen anybody try a Lua outside of limited. Just kind of a whiff, unfortunately. Chaos. Fuck this card. Pardon my French. Just don't like anything about this card. Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. I like it when it's played in monster decks as like a mid-late game finisher. I think that's cool. That's fair. I don't like how uninteractable monster decks are, but I think a finisher like this is fine for them playing an underused card type that cannot have bursts, because there are no monsters in the game that have an EX burst. I'm okay with that. I hate the Chaos combo deck. I don't like the lack of skill expression it has for either player. I think the fact that if it didn't have the discard 2, I think it would be fine. But the fact that it is also just turn 1 Sephiroth, but also I'm dealing you 3 to 4 points of damage before you do anything, sucks. It's an unfun play pattern that basically it's. And the cards that check this are so weird because even if you missed Dragon, they can punish you by having another special in hand. Which makes it almost not even correct to frickin' miss Dragon. It's not winning most of it, but it won European Nationals because they weren't prepared for it. I don't know what Europe is on, by the way, why none of this seemed to show up, and all of the decks that this deck prey on were just made top cut, no problem. What caused that? I have no idea. But yeah, I don't like the fact that this deck is forcing decks to play 25 to 30 bursts. I think that if Chaos wasn't a deck in the meta, I think that Waters meta representation could go down a fair bit. I think a lot of the reason people are playing Mono Water is it just happens to have a good density of bursts and cards that can maybe survive against this deck. Um, yeah. All right, let's get to the limit breaks. I think Arden design wise is really cool. I talked though earlier with Drautos that people just are not willing to play. I am not willing most games to take a turn off to play a French vanilla, which is what Arden kind of is at the end of the day. Um, Even if he's a French vanilla that can in some matchups play two more French vanillas, that's still all he is. Maybe he's under experimented with against something like Chaos. Like they go for the thing. You play Arden, and now like they have to crash in one of their disciplinary committee members before the Arden gets out of the way. But like they also just lightning the Arden out of the way, and you die anyway. So who really cares? Vincent is a card that I've seen a fair amount of. Usually it's a one of in most fire decks. And this guy was kind of the bane of my existence for the Ice Lightning deck. A lot of times I would get people down to like one, no cards in hand. They'd have a fire backup. They would crack it, play Vincent, and I would have to deal with a 8k first striker for the rest of the game because the removal to get this guy off the field was sometimes really difficult. So this card actually ended up being a little both better than I thought in those situations against like turbo discard decks. He's actually really strong, and also quite a bit worse than I expected in that breaking backups really hurts. Like I expected most Earth decks to splash a copy of this to break their own Shantotos, and that hasn't panned out in the slightest. Kuja. I am sorry, Kuja. I was not familiar with your game. The first time I read this card, I thought this card read terribly. This card is incredible. So strong. Um, Kind of like Ice, weirdly, out of their 4 LB cards currently, have 3 of the strongest generic ones between Kuja, Surges, and Victora. Um, I think that like if other Ice decks were more prominent, I think Kuja gets even stronger. Just because Ice does not have a lot of ways of dealing with this guy that don't target. Yeah, I did not expect this card to be as ridiculous as he's come out being. And I've had a lot of like Ice discard games go to like a Kuja mirror where it's like mutually assured destruction of, well, if you choose him, I'm going to freeze your guy, but then you don't want to freeze him with the Kuja trigger that they give you because then they get a second trigger on him. Like, just really, really good card. Also does a great job of giving Ice and like Ice Lightning a way of interacting at instant speed, because I think the summons in those decks, you don't play a ton of them, and they kind of end up becoming like main phase only decks, which is sometimes a problematic. Like you probably can like warp an Astinian or play a Gilgamesh. Like if you know you're against one of those types of decks, Kuja gives you an instant speed way of dealing with Gilgamesh or with Astinian, and stopping every attack trigger on your opponent's turn is so valuable and so strong. Insanely strong card that I completely underrated at first. Kate Sith is... I'm going to catch a lot of slack for this. This is the best Legend limit break of the set. It just is. I will get to the others in a little bit. I don't think there is a deck that plays Kate Sith in his top tier right now. I do think Kate Sith is the Legend with the most long-term potential to be a strong card. I would play decks to enable Kate Sith. I am not sure that I would do the same. I definitely will not ever do the same for Edge. And I think Ico is going to need very specific types of decks to be good. Kate Sith needs a specific type of deck, but I think that like those decks can and will exist in the future. I don't think the case to be made for Edge. I think a card like Montleonis, a card like Ace, and a card like Edge can fall off in their usefulness over time. That is not ever going to happen with Kate Sith. I don't see a stronger version of Kate Sith ever existing. Could be wrong, but yeah. Sid. Um, I have a love-hate relationship with this card. I love what he does. I think this is one of the best, fairest, coolest cards they've made. He is determined to miss as often as he can for me. Um, that doesn't matter. I think this is like one of my favorite cards of the set. I think that like to me, when Limit Break does stuff like this, I'm not a big fan of the limit breaks that require you to be set up to do things. The limit breaks that like get you to the point where your deck engines are running and doing their things are my favorite limit breaks. Sid is just perfect for that situation. And my copium is that when I miss with Sid, well, I was screwed anyway. So at least now I'm 3 cards closer to my next backup. Which is unironically still valuable in a deck like Refia. Death Gaze sucks. Moving on. Ico is a card I've actually messed with a little bit. So, how do I talk about this? One of the first decks I built when this set released was Mono Lightning Scion's Chaos Arc. Again, I was looking for something I could play next to Refia, and I think that with the exception of the deck's matchup against Mono Water, it could go the distance. It could do everything it needed to do. And hilariously, this was the Legend LB that I was playing in that deck. I was playing the Earthwind Y'shtola, a card that I really never actually would have played otherwise, but it gave me access to Ico, and being able to cast an Arc late game for 6 CP is great. She's really, really cool. I love the design space this card takes. I like the way that she plays. I love the Amano art. I really like this card. I think of the Legend LBs, this is one that has long-term potential still. But also, 9 summons is a lot. I think we almost need like a self-mill style summon deck for Ico to real, or a deck that plays cards like Arc, or like other really strong and expensive summons for Ico to really come into that metagame space. I do think this is a card that has long-term potential. And playing Wind Earth Y'shtola enabled me to also play Noctis. So Noctis to me is kind of like the 4th horseman of the generic LB deck. It's like Leo, Lunafreya, Tidus, and Noctis. Like I guess Cloud as well. Maybe Cloud is up there too, but maybe Cloud goes in over Lunafreya. But I also like think he's really fair outside of his interaction with Emmett Selk. Like he just kind of I don't ever feel great playing him. I feel like I'm taking a turn off when I do so a lot of the time. Like again, good card, strong, but not game breaking in any way. Just kind of what I want limit breaks to feel like a lot of the time. Edge sucks. This card really really sucks. I had him in my Ice Lightning deck for the first 1 or 2 locals I played, and every time he was like one of the first LBs I flipped. I have seen him do something exactly 1 time ever, and in that situation he did something like we've mathed it out. It didn't actually matter that he did anything. I almost every situation you could play him, you could play Cloud, save 1 LB, save 1 extra CP, and like for him to be good, you have to have a situation where your opponent has multiple things you want to destroy that has 7,000 power, or 1 big thing, and the ability to attack with 2 lightning forwards. I've literally never cast this guy, even in like Mono Lightning Scions. Um, yeah, he's just bad. I don't know like a better way of putting it. I wish that like Lightning got a good LB there. Like there's still like Cloud and Lightning are still really good, but this guy is not it. I did not play a copy of Nyx in my Ice Lightning deck. There's maybe an argument that I could have, but I thought the second Surges was just really, really strong. And the more I played Kuja, and the more I realized Kuja was like secretly broken, the less I really felt like I needed Nyx. I do like that, like if you're a Lightning deck, with a high propensity to get Amaterasu, you have this really nice like, well, my thing died to Amaterasu, so here is the next best thing. You know, just tap it back up, you know, poop out a 9K vanilla. I think there's value in that. I think he's Nyx is perfectly fine and acceptable. Beatrix is fine. Um, Not much more to say about that. She does what she says in the tin. I've seen her win games with by having the attack trigger and by giving you an LB job knight to proc a Lastwell. And she's not breaking knights or making them do anything new, so she's just kind of there. Luna Freya is absurd. I She feels less bad than I thought she would have resolved against you, but she still feels really kind of bad to play against. I'm not gonna lie. I don't like a lot of her design space, and like the first, there's a lot of like there's like almost like a feeling of dread when your opponent like resolves a Luna Freya against you, because like it's a lot of the logic why like people say like Pot of Prosperity is actually stronger than um, Pot of Desires in Yu-Gi-Oh. Like very similar high cost, but like Luna Freya allows you to see the card you need to win the game a lot more often, and especially if you're in an EX burst deck, it's not difficult for her to be cheaper than Noctis and better. There are situations where she is just watercolor Noctis. Um, like I need a card back from the break zone, or I need a specific character. Noctis can always get that character, but doesn't have the chance of just randomly drawing you an extra card. Luna Freya has the ability to do that. Lastly, Luso. I love Luso. This card is so cool. Very happy that they printed this. This is what I want LB design to be. Um, he tries to fix a problem with the game. So yeah, that's like my hour like set in review. I'm really excited for the next set actually. If I go here, I think there's a lot of potential in Hidden Legends and the cards that have been shown. Um, Not very excited about the multi-element LBs. I think these are really boring, unfortunately. But maybe we'll have some cool ones. But yeah, in the meantime, let me know if you guys have any other thoughts of this set. Anything that like pops out at you as like, Ghoul is clearly wrong here. Um, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.